So we're going to have a look at a pre-release and code a pre-release. Please do this along with me. Please code along with me, pausing where you need to, if you need to, and we'll look at how this all relates to the exam afterwards. So here is the front page of the pre-release. The pre-release is sent through your exam centre that you've booked about 3 months before the exam is you're going to sit your exam. The coding that you do, the examiner never sees your code, so you don't have to worry about submitting your pre-release code. But without doing the pre-release, you won't be able to pass the second paper because it's 20 out of 50 marks out of the whole exam. So it's a massive chunk of marks, and you can just about scrape a pass if you didn't answer any of these, and that's only if you got maximum marks on the rest of the paper. So this is a pre-release. This was the first pre-release for the UK area. It's quite a simple one. The pre-releases seem to have got a bit harder, but don't worry too much about that. In essence, they are very much the same. Let's have a look at this pre-release anyway, and we'll worry about future ones in other sessions. So it says, write and test a program to complete the 3 tasks. Task 1, a data logger records the temperature on the roof of a school twice a day at midday, midnight. Input and store the temperatures recorded for a month. You must store the temperatures in 2 one-dimensional arrays, one for the midday temperatures and one for the midnight temperatures. All the temperatures must be validated on entry and any invalid temperatures rejected. You must decide your own validation rules. You may assume that there are 30 days in a month. Task 2 is calculate the average temperature for both of those and then output these averages with a suitable message. And then task 3, select the day with the highest midday temperature and the day with the lowest midday temperature, then output each of these temperatures and the corresponding day and a suitable message. So we've done all this in all the lessons. We've done everything that you can possibly need to do for this task. But obviously what we're going to do now is we're going to put that all together and do this pre-release. So let's just not worry about task 2 and task 3. Let's look at task 1. So task 1, it says a data logger records the temperatures on the roof of a school twice a day. So we know I've got Python idle here. I've got a new file somewhere. So I've got my Python idle open, and we're just going to have a look at task 1, and it says a data logger records the temperature on the roof twice a day, and we need to input and store that. So we're inputting and storing 2 temperatures, and it tells us there to store them, how to store them in 2 arrays. So we need 2 arrays for this. So we'll need to create 2 arrays, one for the midday, one for the midnight. All the temperatures must be validated on entry, so validate the entries and reject any that are outside my own validation rules. Okay, so we can, and it says there we can assume there's 30 days in a month, so we'll use that later on. So we need to have 2 arrays. So the first array is going to be midday, so I'm going to create that one and it's going to be blank. The second one is going to be midnight, and that's going to be blank too. So that's done, that's what we're going to store. But now we need to input and store the temperatures. So inputting those, let's have a think about that. Well, we use input for that, don't we? We use input, which is a function. So the first one we need to have, maybe we could create a variable to store that, what they enter, and I'll call it midtemp, and we're going to input this. Please enter midday temperature. So that's got a prompt, and then I'll call it night temperature, and that's going to be the same. But actually, I'm just going to copy and paste that to save time. But it'll be midnight temperature. Don't forget, if I'm going too fast for you, just pause the video and you can enter this in on your own. So don't forget to do this yourself as well. Don't just watch this. It's really important that you do this code yourself too. Now, the main problem with this is when we enter this, it's going to assume that this is text, and we are going to have to do maths on this later on. So what we need to do is we need to cast this to an integer, or actually, thinking about that, probably a float actually. Temperatures generally tend to have a decimal place. So actually we'll cast these to a float. Don't forget the extra bracket on the end there, so that we can do maths on these later on. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add those into the arrays. Now, before we do this, we do need to validate the entries. So we need to think about how this is going to work. Generally speaking, we've got absolute zero, which is a very, the coldest temperature possible, or that scientists think is possible. But we've also got a maximum temperature as well. Now, obviously what you pick will be up to you, but I'm going to pick a min and a max temperature. So the minimum temperature, I'm going to create this as a variable. The minimum temperature, I reckon, minus 50. I don't think you're going to be able to get anything colder than minus 50 maybe. We could always change it later on. And the maximum temperature, actually I'm going to assume that this is all in degrees C as well, degrees centigrade. So obviously some people might use Fahrenheit, but I'm going to use centigrade, and it doesn't specify that in the pre-release, so we can just pick one that we want. So I don't know, 100 would probably be too high for maximum temperature, so I'm going to say 80 degrees centigrade. I mean, that's still really hot, but yeah, okay. I mean, you could also have a look online and see what sort of the maximum recorded temperature is in the world and what the minimum was. But we're going to use these variables. We've set them right at the top. We're going to use them in our validation. Now, the other thing is it said we've got to store 30 days worth of, and I probably should have put that here, 30 days worth of data. So we need 30 days worth of data. So we're going to need a for loop. We know exactly how many times we're going to loop 30 days. So we need a for loop in that case. Remember, there's two types of loops, a while loop and a for loop in Python. And a for loop is going to be the best because we know we're going to need 30 days of data. So I'm going to create a for loop. And it's going to be from 0 to 30. Actually, it needs to be 0 to, 1 to 30. There we go. And don't forget that we need to indent this code here. We must indent this code in order for this code here that we're inputting the data to belong to that for loop. If we don't indent it, if we do this, then it's not part of that for loop. So just pause there, make sure you've got absolutely everything the same as me, and don't try and run your code yet. Just wait a moment and we'll start testing this and having a look. So hopefully you've paused and you've got your code exactly the same as mine. If you've got any errors, just remember that syntax errors are usually caused maybe by a missing bracket somewhere. Don't forget your colon at the end here. Don't forget your indents as well. Don't worry about the errors, just look at what the error is telling you and then try and run it. So I'm just going to run this and save it. So I've just saved and run my code, and let's have a look. So it's now asking me to enter a midday temperature, so I could put, 56. I can put anything in here. And it's just going to repeat around 30 times. Obviously it's going to be take quite a while for this. So here's a tip for you. Let me just pause that. I'll do Control C. So here's a tip for you. When you're writing your programming, before you do anything else, you don't have to put in 30 there. If we have 30 for the whole time, it's going to take forever to test. So let's just put 3 for now. So we've changed this temporarily to loop around 3 times, so that when we're testing in this environment, we don't have to worry, oh, it's going on and on forever. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to check what the user has entered. And we need to, with our own validation rules, check to see whether or not they've entered anything too low or too high. So what we can say is we need an if statement to do that. Or if we're examining anything, we always use an if statement. So we can say if the midday temperature that they've entered is less than the minimum temperature, or the midday temperature that they've entered is greater than the maximum temperature, which is 80, so we type max temp. Then we're going to send them an error. We're basically going to say print error temperature is invalid, too high or low. Okay. If they don't do anything like that and they've entered something that is okay, it's going to hit the else here, and that means that we can then add it to our array. So I'm going to add that to my array. So it's my midday array. So I'm going to say midday.append the midday temperature that they've just entered. Okay, so let's just go over that again. This line here lets the user input a temperature. This line here checks to see if the temperature that the user has entered is less than -50 or it's greater than 80. So it's got to be between -50 and 80. And if it is between those, if there's an error, they've entered something too low, too high, it will print out and say error, it's invalid. But if they haven't entered something that's invalid, it's just going to add it into the array. Okay, so we're just going to do that again, but with the nighttime temperature. So all we'd have to do is copy and paste this. Copy and paste this here. But this time, instead of the mid temperature, we're going to change that to night temperature. So just make sure you do that. It's quite easy to miss that off. It's going to be the night temperature. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. It's going to be the night temperature. There we go. Okay. And we need to add it to the midnight temperature array, like that. So I'm just going to also add some print here. I'm just going to print out the midday temperature array and the nighttime one. This is just debug, just so that we can see that everything's working correctly. Okay, so I'm just going to run this and test it. And let's have a look. Oh, see, I've got an error there. EOL while scanning string literal. So I've missed off a end quote. There we go. And I've done it here as well, so it's easy to do, as you can see. So I've missed an end quote and a bracket, closing brackets as well. So let's run that now. Just hopefully we don't get any more errors. No, good. Okay, so let's run this. I'll just make the window a bit smaller so that you can see what I'm typing in. There we go. And so I'm just going to enter in just some, very simple data. There we go. So it's entered it twice, and we've got 3 and 3. Okay, good. So now what we can do is test to see whether or not my line here, where I'm checking to see if it's too small or too big, works. So let's run that and test that. It's always important to test your if loops, your if statement, sorry. So let's do a -100. There we go, good. Error temperature is invalid. And let's do a really high value, so 90. It's too high or too low. Good. So there we are. We've only got one entry because the other two were too high. Good. Okay, so that is basically task 1 done. So I've also just noticed another problem actually. What I'd done was I'd had mid temp here. While I was testing that, I noticed that I had this append here said mid temp. I've forgotten to change it. So make sure you change this variable here to be night temp, otherwise it's not going to work properly. So if we run that as well, we can just do a few things here, just make sure everything is correct. I've done this, I've increased my entry as well to 4 or 5 so that it gives a bit more data. There we go, good. Okay, so that's all fine for task 1.